So there we go. You'll find a recording of this webinar online afterwards, as well as the little PowerPoint we have here, which has a few basic information for you of what we're going to be looking at today. So what is today's webinar about? We are going to be talking about content management. We'll start off with a quick look into the application, do some simple things, import a bit of content, see what can be done. And then we'll go through a few different options, especially related to content synchronization, how you can build up multiple systems, how you can define how content is synchronized to different machines. Then we'll dive into content management, look at the tools we have in Vertex to make your life easier. And to finish everything off, we'll have a few small tips and tricks for you, just from best practice advice, which we've got from our clients or we've developed on when we're doing trade shows or demo setups. So that's what we'll be covering today. As always, our webinars are here for you to ask questions. So in Zoom, you'll find a Q&A section at any time during the webinar. Please don't hesitate to drop in any question you may have. We will either answer it in writing. We'll always try to put it right into the webinar itself. And if for some reason, for example, maybe it's a project related question or doesn't really fit into the webinar, then we will contact you via email with a dedicated answer to that as well. So at any time, please just go ahead and put your questions into our Q&A section. Did I miss anything, Jan?
No, I think one thing that you forgot to mention is we will be working with the current beta version, actually the one from today. So we're currently releasing or uploading new versions almost daily. We have a few projects that already run the beta version live, and it will be pretty soon. We'll push this to be our next current version to move into a release stage very soon. So hopefully during the course of this month. That's what we're looking at the moment. At the moment, it's just a little bit of touch-ups, and the webinars are always a good place to to test drive the application to see if everything is working as expected. That's why you might see a few user interface elements that you have not seen before in the release version. So there's a couple of filtering options that will touch base here and there. But in general, we'll be working with this version. What we've set up over here is a simple session for now. So we have the master system here and a secondary system that is a session member. Right now, there's no content at all in the system. And I'm always confusing team viewer with Zoom. So I'm trying to click into Zoom and it doesn't work. So the content section is empty. But we'll go ahead and the normal workflow is if you start Vertex as it is, you would go ahead and just import some content. I'll just, for example, I'll just import a small little file here. Let's see, where's my test content? I'll just import happy feet. And while I'm doing this, it will automatically create proxy files for me. These are low resolution preview files. And once the proxy file is done, you will see that in the content transfer monitor, which is this tab over here, it will automatically start transferring the data of that content. And I think it's already done since it was so small so that it's already pushed.
In the office here, we currently have a 2.5 gigabit network. And
okay, I should have chosen a bigger one.
The file is
a progress bar over here.
So
okay, maybe we can use a bigger one. Martin, do you, since this is your system, you probably do it.
Let's grab one of our larger trailers. HAP as a great format as it is, it's always a bit of a hog when it comes to size. Let me see if I have a HAP clip somewhere. I'll go for one of the backgrounds. Here we go. Here we have a HAP file, and this should definitely be a bit larger. And hopefully we'll now see a bit of a content transfer happening. So we can see up here, transfer started. And I think it's, there we go.
There we go,
We're just catching the last bit.
Right. So here in this content transfer monitor, so in this tab, you can see all your currently running processes, and they will stay alive for a moment so that you can see them. You can pause them. You can pause the entire process if you hit the button up here. And this is the default setting. So by default, Vertex will synchronize all content to all systems, which you might not always want that, but this is the default setting, so that as soon as you import content on any system, it will be distributed to all the others. Yeah, this is something that Vertex does for you by default. Yeah, then yeah, it doesn't matter if it's on the timeline or not. It's just as soon as content is added to project, this process will be kicked off. Should I go into content versioning, or what were you planning next, Mark?
We could either jump into a content version just for the fun of it. Yeah, let's do a content version for the fun of it before we get into a few basic concepts inside of Vertex.
And the same also applies to importing a new version. So I can import a new version for a piece of content here. So in case I've used that content on the timeline or elsewhere in the playlist, I can import a new content version for this particular clip. Now I'll use cars now, or I could use a background. I don't mind. So this is probably a ProRes file.
Choose your poison. I think it's probably H.264, but that's good.
Okay.
Let's check what kind of a file it is. So let's click on it.
It's processing.
Oh, sorry about that.
What's going on?
Well, I'm guessing the master is going to need some time, so I'll switch over to the session member quickly. So this is the second machine we are working on. And if I see I'm clicking on Happy Feet here, I'll go to Info. And here you can see it's an H.264 file, 50 megabytes. So that's where you can get some info. We'll be covering this in a little bit. Especially in the new beta, we have a few new functions when it comes to sorting things and filtering and finding that. So we'll be covering that a bit later when it comes to content management. But for now, I would dive into the PowerPoint, if that's okay for you, Jan, and give you some basic insights into how things work inside of Vertex, especially when it comes to the field of content synchronization and content transfer, so to speak. So as we already started off, we always get asked, what is the default of Vertex? If you don't change anything at all, what's going to happen? So first is, what is going to be transferred? The answer to that is extremely simple: everything. It doesn't matter if you import a picture, if you import a video, a 3D object, an audio file, everything gets transferred. It doesn't matter if you import it on your master, if you import it on a session member, everything gets transferred. Where is it transferred to? It gets per default sent to every system which is currently in your session, and every system which is connected to your session or will be connected to your session. So every system which is there and will be there will receive the content. And the last part, which is quite interesting, where does the content go physically on your system? So on your source system, where you're importing your content, per default, the content doesn't go anywhere. It stays exactly where you import it from. So if you import it from an external drive, it's going to stay there. If you import it from a local drive, it's going to stay there. And on your session member, it's going to be copied to the project folder. Those are the default settings you have to keep in mind when you set up Vertex out of the box. Of course, all of this can be customized, and that's what we're going to be looking at in this webinar. So we're going to be looking at first the general settings, the top level settings of what you can do in regards to content synchronization. Then we'll look at what happens with the import destination. So where are imported files stored? And then we'll look at how do you define targets, how do you decide which system should receive something and do something with the content. First things first, top level settings. So I'm just going to jump over into, I'll give you a second. So no, first I'll do some explanation. All of the settings you see here, you will find in your project settings inside of Vertex. Vertex has project settings. We'll look at that in a little bit where you have that. And even before we come to that step, the first thing to understand is the project path. When you run a Vertex installer, in the installer window, it always has a little field which asks you, what is the project path, the default project path? That means if you have a session member and you don't change any setting, a new project and the content will be created in this path. In many cases, you will have multiple hard drives. You may have a C drive, which you use for your Windows system or your Windows operating system. You may have a second drive, which you use for content, which is a nice, fancy, fun RAID. Make sure to define your project path on your fastest drive. So if you, for example, have a system which has 2 drives and one is faster than the other, put the project path on that drive. This project path is only relevant per system. So you can go ahead and mix these things. You could have one system which only has one SSD, which you have the project path on C/Vertex, for example, whatever you want. And you could have a second system in the same session, which a project path is something completely different. It doesn't matter. It's only per system. The next thing which we have to look at is when we're importing files, as Jan showed a bit before, we import proxy files, we create proxy files. So every file which you import per default generates a proxy file. And the proxy file is a low resolution preview, which can come really in handy, especially when working with large amounts of content. But there may be situations where you either want to turn off the generation of this proxy file to just be faster. And there are a few things you can decide to do with a proxy file, which we'll look at in a little second. And at the end, we have the content sync mode. So how does Vertex actually sync content? Is it sent to all targets or both? And I would say, Jan, is that a good moment to jump into the application, have a look?
Yeah, we can go back. Yeah, what happened is, I'll check what went wrong. Obviously, the add version is currently stuck. We added a new content drive disk space calculation, and maybe it's just stuck there for a moment. And we'll check that later. So that's in this beta version. So yeah, so we'll skip the content versioning for now, but the rest should be working fine. So Martin just opened the project settings. The project settings can be found under Edit, and then most of you probably already know that. Project settings are here, and then it opens a pop-up. In the new beta, there's also the little gear icon, which opens all the project settings in a floating inspector. Since there are even more settings, most of them you might not need them most of the time, but these are just there for general settings like if you want to encode proxy files or not, since sometimes this can take a lot of time, you might want to turn that feature off. So you could turn that off, or you want to choose a different mode of the hub playback. And but what Martin was starting to is how to set up the content synchronization, so the content transfer mode. General setting, turning on and off, is it enabled at all? So you could entirely disable the content sync, and just by unchecking this checkbox here, and then no files would be transferred whatsoever. But you could still do a manual transfer or use network mapped NAS drives. So in this case, you would just disable the Vertex content transferring. If you use Vertex content sync or content distribution, you have several modes. So again, no sync is the same as disabling it. All, that means to all session members, so all systems in a project. All our targets means you can set up so-called content targets. You can group multiple systems as a target system together. So for example, you have 10 machines and 5 of them are operating in one room and another 5 in a different room, and you don't want the same files on the same group of systems, then you can group them together, and we'll show you how to do that. And this all our targets means you might work in a mixed mode that sometimes you want to just distribute the content to all machines, to all 10, and sometimes you'll work with the targets. So you can use in mixed mode as well, or use targets only. You set up your targets with so-called collections. We'll show that in a minute, and then you can choose how your content synchronization is done. So which one goes where. Yeah, what else is here? Then there's the content sync transfer. So by default, yep.
We'll come to that in a little bit.
Okay.
That's the next chapter, but pretty much that was the first one. But yeah, it's a good point. Let's move one on. The first thing, before we go into how content is handled at its destination, we have to actually see what happens to the content when you import it onto your system. So as mentioned before, the default is we leave the content at its source. If you import it from C/content, we're not going to do any copying at all. But there may be certain situations where you don't want that. Maybe you have people coming along with a bunch of external hard drives, plugging them in, and you want to bundle, you want to put everything together in one location. And for that, there is an option called copy to project path. We'll jump back over again. And
this one here?
See, exactly, perfect. Right. If you activate that, every content you import on your master will also, on your local system, will also be put into the project path. So for example, if you have external drives, you can unplug them afterwards and you'll still have the content in the project file. So that's one additional setting I wanted to point out before we jump into the sync paths, the sync destinations. So which is relevant on the system where it arrives. And what Jan just mentioned, we have a content drive setting, which can be set, which will monitor the disk space for you on every system. So that, for example, if you set a content drive to drive number D, drive letter D, it will monitor, is there enough space for the content you're importing on that drive? And if not, it will give you a warning. That's what Jan has just prepared.
Brought this up, yeah. So on each system, since you might ask the question, what if my content drive is D or V or something else? So you can set up the content drive here. This is only for monitoring so that we can, I use the filtering function here, which is down here in the beta version. So I just entered content, then it brought up in the system inspector all the content related properties. And here we can see by default, it's the C drive. And it will give you a warning if the C drive doesn't have enough space anymore. So even on remote systems. So if you would import content and you don't have enough storage anymore, then it won't let you. If you want to bypass it, you could just put in any arbitrary drive letter to bypass that. Just in case, since we have a fail-safe of 1 gigabyte that needs to be present for the operating system and in general for the system to operate okay. And here you also see the free content space in gigabytes, in bytes if you want to do any calculations with it, and also in percent. So there's these three properties that can use either in a controlled view or elsewhere. But in general, this is where you get it, and it can be set up individually for every system. So
maybe to give you a bit of a rule of thumb, if you have a system, for example, with 32 gigabytes of RAM, it's not only going to be using these 32 gigabytes of RAM, it's also going to be writing things onto your hard drive. So running a system with 5 or 10 gigabytes of storage left and 32 gigs of RAM is not a good idea. I would personally suggest to have at least what you have in RAM available on your system, just to have a safe operating condition. Otherwise, Windows is not happy with what's happening.
Yeah, also a hint here, the default page size, which is the additional RAM on the disk for the operating system, is 8 gigabytes by default from Windows. I usually recommend to dial this up a little bit higher in case you have enough storage or your project is very, very RAM intensive. We've seen that, but yeah, in general, it's a good rule of thumb to keep the RAM size also as storage left on the disk. Yeah, and going back to the project settings, I guess we were just about to, we were talking about the copy to content and also targets, and also which one is the content drive and which one is being monitored. And is it okay that I continue with the content sync transfer? So that
please do.
So there's 3 modes here. Default is project path. Project path means that when you import a file on a system, it will be transferred to your target system. And on the target system, you may wonder, where will this file be stored once it's being transferred? So where's the destination path? And by default, it's inside of the project path. Vertex will create on the target system the project path, not necessarily with the project itself, but with the folder structure behind, the data folder, the content folder, and the content versions inside. We can have a look at it in a minute. So this is the default setting, and there's also relative path. This would create a resource folder next to the project folder on the target machines and replicate the folder structure of your source machine so that you have the same structure there. Or source path, it will try to build the same path as on the source machine. So if your source was C/content/test, it will try to create and copy the file to the same location on your target machine. So these three options are available here. There's also a fourth one internally that I'll mention later, just for the experts around here. Did I miss anything?
No, pretty much that's the summary of what we just had here. And as mentioned, we'll have this PDF ready for you later with the video on YouTube. And what's sometimes important to remember, everything we're talking about now, the content sync mode, only affects the destination. It's not the source. It's where does it get sent to? That's important to keep in mind. Mm-hmm. And yeah, now the next step would be, now we've chosen let's say we've chosen project path, and now we want to start to send content to certain systems, but we only want to send them to certain systems. And there's two ways of doing that, and that would be the next thing we would step into, which is assigning our target systems via collections or assigning them on the level of a content itself.
There's even a third way. So the simplest one for me is when I right now we are importing to all, right? So and let's say we want to work with target systems only. Then we would choose, well, we could choose targets here, so targets only. And then in order to create a target, you might wonder how does that work? By importing from system, by right-clicking here, I am on system 1, and I right-click on system 2, and I do import content, import file. Which one didn't we import it? I think this one. So now
didn't know that one. I didn't even know that one.
You didn't know that one. Okay, so
no.
there are many
I learned
options
something
here. Okay, so the target system. So I had to switch to advanced mode in the UI, and you see down here there's a target systems list, and this content number 4 has a target system 2. So it's only being transferred to target system 2. And that happened because I did a right click on that machine. So I decided on my master, on machine 1, that whatever I will be importing now will be transferred to system 2. And oh yeah, I accidentally added another one.
No, that's me.
Oh, that's you. That's you on the other system. Okay, perfect.
Welcome to Vertex multi-user workflow. As soon as systems are connected, everything I do on my system is automatically done on Jan's system, because having 2 systems and importing to only one is a bit not much fun. So I've added a dummy system.
Okay.
Which so we can now
could do now is let's say we want to group these 2 together. I think that was Martin's intention earlier. So we could first of all just create a collection here. Add collection, and a collection is basically a folder where you can put multiple systems as a reference into it. So I can take my system 2, drag and drop it here, take my system dummy here. And these are now shown here. This little star means these are so-called collection items. And if I do a right click on the collection, import file, it will import and create a target that is using the collection. And we can also later change the collection, and we'll use this all the time. So I could go ahead and pick another file. Let's just use this one. And now that we have this one in place, now we have target systems, collection, dummy, and system 2. So I could add more here, or I could add even a third system. That was Martin was doing. And I could drag and drop it down here. That's also a way of how to add multiple target or destination systems. So the target systems are located and are stored per content, and they are defined at the moment of import. That's important to know.
There's one more way I might mention, which can be used if you have large amounts of content. If I go into the all category, I can add a collection in the all category and call this content only for dummy. And then I'll create a second collection and I'll call it content for dummy and 2. And now I can go ahead to my systems and grab my dummy system, put it into the collection number 1, grab my dummy system, put it in collection number 2, and take my system number 2. So now I have a collection with system 2 and dummy. Oh, sorry, that was wrong. Here we have
other way around.
Other way around. Unbelievable. So there we go. And I'll throw out system number 2 here.
The top one, delete one selected item, this one.
Thank you.
Not the reference, not the reference. Now you delete both.
Oh.
Delete one, just the item, not the reference. The reference would delete also the source.
Okay, sorry about that. So we have only for dummy. I'll go up here. I'll say delete one selected item. And then here we have dummy in both. And now I can simply go ahead and import content into this collection. And then I also have a visual representation. If I look at my folders, I'll see, this is the content which is only going to dummy. And here I have a visual representation of what's happening there. For that, it's a bit easier to see if we're working with large amounts of content and maybe in a show situation where it's very dynamic, you have a lot of things arriving. This can help you out very much to sort things out.
So the all collections are a place where you can combine content and systems together.
But luckily, as it can be a bit of a challenge to find out which content is where, there is a useful inspector or a useful editor to actually see that, where you can find out where is my content actually being used, or where is it done. And we can see here, it's called the target system monitor. If I switch
by the way, that's a new feature of the beta version. Which is, it is new since a few weeks, a few months, I would say.
And the good thing is, it's probably a bit much for today, but this doesn't only apply to content, it also applies to things like node systems or other processing, which you can assign to certain systems. But basically, when we're here, you can see I have my background number 4, which is only assigned to system number 2. And maybe I'm in a show situation, I'm trying to play background number 4 back. It isn't working on my system number 1. I don't understand why. I can simply jump into here. I can then, or let's say happy feet, I can use the search function, type in happy. I'll find happy feet and I can see, it doesn't have a target system. So I can even in here, say add target system with a right click, and then say add target system with a right click. And now it will be transferred to these 2 systems. So that's a very fast way if you're in a show situation to find out why, for example, is a content not running on a certain machine. Okay, did I miss anything?
No, I think that's the complex part. So that's really when you want to manage and organize multiple systems and multiple targets. If there's any questions, just feel free to ask.
Anytime.
One more thing that is also one of the basics to know about where content is stored. Martin mentioned earlier, the content resides at the original path by default. And once we create the proxy files and the thumbnail files, everything you see here for preview in the user interface, you can always right click on a file and say open local cache folder. If that option is here, it will open the local project folder and show you that the files are here. We only use this in case of troubleshooting. So if we're missing a file. So the audio peaks, the converted WAV file is here. Some proxy files are here. So that's where the files will get stored on every machine. So on your remote machine, you will have a similar path that looks like this. And maybe we can switch to the other machine and maybe you can open the local cache folder, one of those that were transferred. I guess you have to go to advanced mode.
An advanced mode feature. We tried to tidy for everyone who doesn't know this function. as Vertex has a lot of options, we try to tidy things up. Down here, you can see standard, advanced, and all. Standard is what you need every day. Advanced is what is a bit more uncommon, and all is really for the expert features. So I'll jump into here. It affects right-click menus as well. So now you can see open local cache folder. And now we have a completely different file path, as this is on a completely different machine.
Yeah, and the one thing that I want to mention here you see the source, which is that's actually the copy of the original file that was transferred. And the long numbers here are important for us, for Vertex, to track the amount of bytes and the timestamps. So we need that to truly identify that we have copied the correct data over. So these are just internal files, but for troubleshooting, it's good to know where they are. And if they're not there, if they're not present, you know that something went wrong.
Definitely.
Yeah, another thing that I'd like to show is you can also right-click, and if you see this show file in File Explorer, then it will show you the original location. If it's present, if it's not present, it won't show it to you. So this is also important to keep in mind. So I recently had to troubleshoot a project where we wanted to re-encode some proxies, but the original file wasn't present anymore. So if you want to refresh your proxies and cache files, you need the original file. So, and at the original location.
Yeah, when we're talking about the original location, maybe a little input of how Vertex works. And it's one of the absolute basics, which we sometimes forget to talk about. When you play back a file in Vertex, the first thing Vertex does, it looks at the source path and looks for the file in the source path. If it finds it there, it will play the file back. If it doesn't find it there, it will look in either the relative or the project path, depending what your settings are. So if you switch content sync and everything off, and you only put files in your source path, Vertex will still play them. The logic really is, first we check the source path, then we check the relative and the project path. It's that dual step which happens there.
For the power users over here, if you switch quickly to the UI, this is the default behavior. So if I click on a file here, under settings, you will find the file source mode. It will look at the original path first. It can also look at the project path first, original path only, or project path only. So believe it or not, we have clients who ask for us. That's why these features are there. Normally, and we're explaining a lot of details here, normally you don't need to know all these details or to worry about them, but it's good to know if you know how things function in the background and what options are there. And you can explore and test them. So that's the whole purpose. So we're not explaining you all of this, that you have to use it every day. It's just good to know that these functions are present and available.
Yeah, so maybe to wrap this part up before we jump into the content management tools, a basic workflow we normally recommend, what you can remember is set up first, import second. So really open up your project, set your sync modes, set your collections, build all of that first, and then start importing content. You can always clean things up afterwards. We'll look at that in a bit later, but you're going to make your life so much easier if you set up a clean structure before you start importing content. We see many operators who are a bit in of a rush and say, oh, I'll import all my content at once. Take those 10 minutes it might take you to set up your whole synchronization process cleanly. Make sure, for example, you check that your drives have enough space, just to make sure that everything works seamlessly when you start transferring content afterwards. Okay, so we're going to look at the tools we now have for content management. This is pretty much independent of which sync mode you're using, or even if you're just working standalone, doesn't really matter. And the first thing we would like to show you, especially here in the new beta, is how to import things, how to create subfolders and connections, and also how to sort and filter things. We've pretty much covered quite a few things, but I think it's quite a good opportunity to maybe show off what the new Project Explorer can do.
Yeah, so the Project Explorer has gotten a little update. And as you see, there's also a filter box down here. So if I go here and have much more elements in this list, and as soon as you have hundreds of contents, it can get quite busy in here. So you can use any number, or you can filter it by any name, and yeah, once you hit enter, it will filter the view for you. Or just hit 4, and let's see, it will filter out everything that contains a 4, whether it's the ID or the name. And the same applies to a new list view. Since the tile view is nice, it gives you a nice overview when the projects are small. You're just looking at individual folders in here. When you switch to the list view, this is now, you see, team viewer. Let's make this a little bit larger. So you can reorder the columns. You can sort by columns. You can, and you can filter them. So that's a very, very fast way to find your content, basically.
For example, Jan, while Jan was speaking, I just added 2 PNGs to the project. Let's see if you can find them.
Yeah, I see them directly.
That's no fun. Look for them.
I could type in PNG.
There we go.
So just part of the name.
That's the simple way you can actually do things. So even if, for example, I was working on a different system, Jan's maybe programming the show, you can look for names, you can look for codecs, resolutions, everything you see here. You could even type in the creation date. You could even type in when the file was created. So everything you see here can be filtered and searched.
Yeah, another way to find content, and I've been asked this every once in a while. For example, if you know where your clip is and you wonder, okay, where it is, a simple way to do this is go to the video section or to the main section. And here you see, first of all, the ID of the content, but you can also always right click on it and pin it to a new inspector. So if you want to just know the data or the details of that piece of content, you can always right click on a content reference like here. So that works on all reference properties. A reference property is a property with a checkerboard in the background, and there you can always pin the element to a new inspector if you want to see its details. This is also quite useful to know.
Yeah, and another thing, which is, of course, everything we've been doing now is locally. So we've been working on this one local system, but in many cases, you'll have the situation that somebody will come along and say, oh, I've copied it to a computer, but oh, it's not my computer, it's a different machine. Or what we see a lot, especially in shows, that people preload systems with content. So maybe you have 5 systems and 4 already have the content, 1 doesn't. How do you get the content into your project or things like that? And for that, we have a remote file explorer, which Jan is opening right now, which shows you the file structure, the tree of every connected system in your session. So if Jan goes to system number 2, he'll be seeing what I have on my Razor notebook. He'll see the full file structure. It only has 1 drive. And for example, in C footage, you can jump into that if you like. We have C footage. I'll just open it here. I can open it up. Here I can see all of the files which are in here. And I can either import the whole folder, or in my case, I only want number 48. I can add the content number 48. And now you see it's importing this file on my session member. I can't see the thumbnail yet. It hasn't been transferred. It's still being processed, and it will be transferred any moment now from my session member to my master, where we'll have an import function. Or let me just jump over to my session member. Here you can see file 48 is already here, already has the thumbnail. It will be transferred. And for some reason isn't there yet.
I'll take a note about that.
Perfect. Yeah, that's the good thing about doing the webinar with the beta. We find a lot. So, but you get the basic idea. You can import files not only on your local system, you can import them from anywhere inside of your session.
One more thing regarding the remote file explorer. When you import a content, you can also tick that checkbox here, so that the system from where you imported it also becomes your target system. So that's also possible if you want. Then
the content will only be on that system, will not be transferred into the session. It will remain on that system.
Correct.
You can edit it, you can position it from any system you like. You'll have the proxy files anywhere if that's activated. That makes the life a lot easier as well.
Yeah, and another important and also feature that you need to be careful with, you can even delete directories and files remotely. that as long as Vertex has the rights to that folder, it can do it. So there are certain folders that are only accessible under administrative privileges. Then you cannot delete them unless you have started Vertex in admin mode.
So you can't go and delete Windows regularly.
If you start Vertex in admin mode, you could, but let's hope.
Don't recommend it. Yeah. And then the one thing we were talking about before, which will maybe cover one or two more points, is the collections. We've pretty much got used to using collections that much that we sometimes forget some of the important details regarding the collection. Jan mentioned the word reference before. So what is a collection compared to a folder? Why do we just not call it a folder? Why do we call it collection? A collection is a bit different to what we have when you have a folder. If you have a folder, you can have a file in one folder at the same time. There is no possibility to have the same file in multiple folders. If you want that, you have to, under Windows, you have to create a link, blah, blah, blah. Vertex does it a bit differently. For example, if under content, I'm going to build myself a collection, where is it hiding?
In the middle.
Okay, I was just going to jump back into the standard mode. I'm lazy. So tidy things up. There we go. Add collection. I'll call this clips for my intro. And then I'll build a second collection. And I'll call this one clips for my show. And I can jump to my content and say, okay, this is my super cool intro clip. This is my show for my clip there. But I can now also go ahead and say this one, background number 4, I need it in my intro and in my show. And now if I look at these collections, they both have number 4 in there. This is a reference to the same file, but it's in 2 locations. And that's the major difference between having a folder and a collection. And it's extremely powerful for managing your content in a, let's call it, not technical way, not bound to a file system, but really in an intuitive way. How is your show flow? What are you building? So that's the major difference between a content collection and a content folder on your hard drive, for example. Did I miss something?
No, all good. Any questions so far?
We spoke about proxies. I think we don't have to go into that into detail. We spoke about versioning, but one thing which is pretty important in everyday use is transcoding. If you're lucky to have content producers on site which actually deliver the files in the correct format, you're lucky. In many cases, things will not be in a way you actually want to have them. And for that, we have transcoding directly inside of Vertex. Do you want to take over? Should I keep on going?
Sure. So the easiest way to transcode a file is to simply right-click on the file. For example, this MOV here. I'd like to have it as a HAP or a different format. You can transcode it from the right-click menu. Currently, we offer HAP, HAP Alpha, HAP Q, and ProRes. If there's any other formats that you'd like to see us, drop us an email. Let us know. Type it in the Q&A. Let us know if there's any other favorite presets that you'd like to see here, and then you can choose whether you want to export the video in audio or video only, and if you want to import it as new content or new version for that content. That's basically all there is to do here.
And one other thing I'd mention, and this is pretty useful for small things. Maybe you've received a file in ProRes 444 with alpha, but performance is just not good enough. Then you can, of course, then convert into a HAP alpha. For larger amounts, we always have a Vertex Transcoder, which is here on our desktop. It gets installed alongside Vertex. It's completely free. We've made it as settingless as possible. So for all of these values here, we just choose the best option for Vertex. There's some simple settings, for example, on where you want to have the files go to, how many files you want to encode in parallel. But yeah, just to keep in mind, there is a little tool called the Vertex Transcoder. It's completely free and it's installed.
Here's a user question. Does HAP or ProRes perform better? So the answer depends. So ProRes might offer better quality. and have a smaller footprint in terms of storage, but it will certainly require more CPU processing for decoding. While HAP has maybe a little bit lower quality than ProRes or comparable, depending on what the content is, or HAP-Q might be even a little bit superior or more comparable. But HAP is much larger, but HAP is on the CPU side very, very lightweight for processing. So since it's being decoded, or most of the decoding stage happens on the GPU. So that's why HAP is kind of the preferred format. And we've seen also a lot of projects that use Notch-LC these days. But in general, it's Notch-LC, HAP, and ProRes. And if there's no other way, it's MP4, what we see. Whenever your CPU maxes out, then the MP4 needs to be converted to HAP or ProRes. That's what I see almost daily.
I hate to say how much MP4 we see, but if you look at, I would say if you have a ProRes and a HAP, which is recorded with a regular camera, natural footage, it's hard to see a difference. But especially content which is rendered from, let's say, After Effects or something like that, you are going to see a difference between HAP and ProRes. And we do see a lot of people actually using ProRes, but as Jan mentioned, I would suggest if you're playing back one ProRes 4K on an 8-core system, you're going to be fine. We have clients who are playing back multiple 4K ProRes, even with the alpha channel. Then we highly recommend to go onto one of the high core systems, 18 cores, 32 cores with the Threadrippers, because ProRes really is fully on the CPU.
Yeah. And another rule of thumb is if the resolution gets higher than 4K, or you need really large formats, then HAP is mostly the better format for them.
And HAP-Q and ProRes, I would say, are visually identical. So if you convert a ProRes to HAP-Q, it's very hard to see a difference. Except, file size. Okay. As time is running forward, we would do a very, very short excursion into watch folders. We won't go into too much detail because we've covered this in another webinar already. But of course, Vertex can also support watch folders. So if you go to the Create menu, you'll find watch folder, and there are 3 types. The default is importing content. Now I'll just build one of those just for the fun of it, just to show you the basics. I can click on the watch folder. I can give it a directory, so I can tell it where should it go look for the folders, and I can give it some scripts. For example, if it finds new content and it imports the content, I could, for example, say, save my project. If you're shutting things down all the time, that can be done. And we can also define, let me just switch to the advanced mode.
Which one are you looking for?
The collection, that we put it into a collection. Or did I forget about that?
No, I think the collections are not yet supported in the watch folders.
So in that case, watch folder, it will import the content into your project for you. And we also have the functionality, which we had covered in another webinar, which you can use a watch folder to automatically populate a sequence or a playlist. So when you have files, we have some clients who have, let's say, completely end user administrated projects, where the end users just throw files into a folder, they get put into a playlist, and the playlist loops in certain situations. That's what the watch folders are for. Yeah, just short mentioning of that. Then to finalize things, before we do some Q&A, let's go into the situation that you've imported a lot of content, done a lot of transferring, and at the end of the day, you're running out of storage and you have to do something about it. And I'm sure everyone's had that situation. No matter which system you're used to working, it's normally a pain in the behind to get out of that situation. And in Vertex, we have a few tools of how you can liberate some disk space on any system in your session. And for that, we'll jump back into Vertex, and I'll let Jan take it from there.
Yeah. So in the main menu under tools, there's a few options that can be used for content cleanup. It's under the content cleanup menu. So first of all, you can cancel all file processing. This is important if you have pending file processing on import and you just want to cancel them. You can delete and remove content files from disks. So if there's still content in the project folders that you want to get rid of from the disks, this really will delete it from the drives, even on the remote machines. Or you can remove unused content from the project or versions from the project. So if you want to just remove the versions instead of, and just keep the recent version. Or remove obsolete system content targets. This is just an internal one. So if you've changed your system, you replace them by other ones. There are still entries in the project where this, this is just a burden that the project carries along. And you can also clean up all contents that don't have any system targets, so that that these are being freed again to be either transferred to all of them, or that you can reassign new targets to them, so that you just do kind of clean up here. And the last one is copy all local original source files to folder. This is a special one that you can copy. You can basically bundle your files in one folder. So this is a long copy operation if you want to just collect all the files in one place. So we had a project from one client at one day where he couldn't find all his files anymore. They were all over the place, and he asked us if we could add a function to do that.
So maybe some After Effects users in here know footage consolidation. In After Effects, it's pretty much the same thing. If at the end of the day, you've finished your project, you just want to put it into storage, do whatever, this will grab everything from everywhere, put it in one location. Then, for example, you could take the project file, the project folder. I normally then recommend to just put the current installer you were using into the same folder, put the whole thing on a RAID. And then we have a lot of theaters, for example, which do the same show in a 2-year interval. Then you have everything you need to go back into that show state. Can be very useful if you have changing setups, or if you move setups from one venue to another venue. It will bundle everything for you, and you'll have a clean setup to continue with. Okay, before we do some final expert tips, I'd like to give you just some basic, very, very basic inputs on especially the sync modes. They sound quite abstract. Which should I use for what? In our day-to-day business, we see opportunities for each. So for example, the default mode is absolutely great if you have identical systems. We have a lot of installations which have absolutely identical systems. They want each system to be potentially backing up any other system. Default is absolutely great to go. The source mode is quite useful if you have a mixed setup when it comes to syncing. So for example, we have clients who use Thunderbolt drives and plug these drives directly into the computer and transfer some files locally. But then during the show, they have some new files which they want to use content sync. Source mode is great for that. And it also gives you a good visual overview because you can actually see the file structure on each machine. And of course, if you have one machine which has one drive, the other has 2 drives, all of that falls apart. That's what the relative path is for. So that really, the relative path allows you to combine multiple system setups. We had a client recently who did quite a large award show. He had, I think, 4 different system configurations, and the project path was different on each of the systems. So the source path would have gone completely wrong because there was no unique source path in that setup. So that's why they use the relative path. That just a few quick tips on which sync mode can help you in which situation. And I think, Jan, how many of these should we cover? I think we already did a few.
Most of them. There are some advanced features that you can find if you switch to advanced mode. So once your UI is here in advanced mode, then you will reveal a few features that are available on the content itself here. So you can refresh all proxies and cache files. You can refresh all HAP and NotchLC file caches. I'll explain this a little bit later. I also saw the question earlier what that means. And you can also delete all proxy and cache files if you want to get rid of them. Then on the content itself, just go over here. There's a few options where you can do the same thing just per content. And there's also some more in-depth troubleshooting features that are available in the all view now. for example, you can compute a file hash if you really want to check the file on all targets, if they're really the exact ones. So if something went wrong, but these are really for troubleshooting. So normally you don't need them at all. The one thing that I've seen that you might want to use is delete proxy and cache files, reset and restart content sync. So things like that. And these do exactly what the menu entry says. Yeah, I had the question earlier. What's the difference? HAP high performance, HAP notch LC, which we saw in the project settings, which is over here. It's now a default. By default, it's on. It has been off for the last year. It's a new mode of how Vertex is processing HAP and notch LC files. This basically tries to leverage the throughput of the disks as much as possible, and to avoid any operating system file caching mechanisms. So, and by default, this is on now. And in earlier versions or in the release version, this is still off. This was optional since we were testing it on a couple of projects, and we are now happy with it. We don't see any issues with it anymore. So this can be now used safely. So this is the main reason. So for HD clips, you would probably not notice it, but if you're playing 4K or 8K files, then you quickly come to the point that the Windows file caching is slowing down your playback performance. That's why this is default on. And maybe one day this option will even disappear from that menu.
I can give you one insight from a recent project we supported. HAPQ seems like a very nice file format. It has a very high performance, but what people forget, HAPQ files are pretty large and have to be pulled from your hard drive. And Windows was built for any kind of hard drive, so they have a lot of buffering and everything in between. And what the high performance mode does, it just reads at the maximum speed your drive offers, but it means you have to have a decent drive. So we recommend using the HAP high performance mode when you have NVMe drives or fast RAIDs or fast SSDs. But anything below a gigabyte of speed, drive speed, I wouldn't recommend using. That's not going to give you any benefit whatsoever. But yeah, if you have an NVMe RAID, you're going to enjoy the high performance mode very much.
Yeah. You can even see the performance of the throughput, and this is normally shown in the render editor. You should see it over here. I think it's only in the full screen. That's where it shows it. Yeah, in full screen, it's in the status.
We can switch to that quickly if we want. No, we don't have
in full screen. Let me show you. It's the show status in full screen. That's the option that you need to turn on. Show status in full screen. Then it will also show you the throughput, the current throughput of your media that you're pushing to the GPU.
So just for the fun of it, let's switch to that output, and then you can see that quite quickly. Up here, you can now see the bandwidth is 0. Yeah. If I press play on the other machine, well, it's hardly anything, but you get the basic idea. You'll see the gigabytes which are getting pushed through Vertex per second.
Yeah.
So that's how that can help you get that, see what's happening.
Here's another question. Can content be protected or encrypted? Yes, we support encryption, but with some restrictions. So normal video MOV files can be encrypted and HAP if it's not in high performance mode. So we don't have image encryption, and not for object, not for WAV files, but for QuickTime, since the QuickTime format supports it. And it works similar as the Transcode. You will find it here, encrypt file. You can give it there's certain modes with the expiry or dongle or license, or you can bind it to multiple licenses. So there's several modes that you can choose, and even expiry date. And and then it will re-encode the file, or basically just encrypt the file, and we'll have a different extension at the end, and then it will be imported to the project. And you can use that one with the key, of course.
Then we have a nice question regarding NDI input. Do NDI inputs stream audio as well? Yes, they do. If you go onto System each system you have here will show you all of the inputs which are connected. And if you have an NDI input, add that to your project. You will get the input from that audio feed as well. And as far as I recall, Jan, we also send audio over NDI.
Yes, these are new features of the beta version, and the audio needs to be enabled. You can create an output stream. But what's important is, I think, let's see. Here's also the audio gain and audio mix, so you can even change the gains and do some down mixing. You can even exclude certain channels. So if you have multi-channel audio on the streaming side, and on the input side, I don't know if you imported a stream here.
Don't have one present at the moment. Or
okay, then I'll just use the default one.
Yeah.
It won't do any harm. So if we have this one, here's a checkbox under audio, process audio input, so that you can turn on. It's probably on by default. And yeah.
Any further questions? We know we ran over you like a steamroller with a lot of information, but no worries. We'll have the upload of the recording with the PDF ready probably by tomorrow. And you can always find all of the previous webinars if you go to iversal.com webinars/webinars. You'll find all of the next webinar dates as well as the previous ones. And yeah, to keep in mind, we have two formats. One is the Insight webinar, what we looked at today, which is extremely technical. And then we have the solution talks, which have a much higher, what we call flight height, which we just look at the big picture. And the next one is going to be AV or IP. We're going to look at all of the different protocols which exist. What are their benefits? What are their caveats? What you have to watch out when you use them, without going into too much detail how to do it, but really just giving you an overview which protocol can be used for what and what are its advantages and disadvantages. That's going to be a solution talk in the next weeks, I think. Yeah, all of the dates are online. Any further questions? I think everyone's deserved a coffee.
And
yeah, in that case,
thank you very much for your time.
Yeah. And have a great evening and look forward to seeing you all again soon. And for those who haven't seen, we will be attending Infocom this year. We'll have a booth there, so we'll look forward to hopefully seeing a lot of you at Infocom. And for our Canadian friends, we will be at Exposcene in Montreal in about 2 weeks, where we'll also be on site and present some things regarding Vertex. So we'll also have a special event on one of the evenings where we'll do a tour of the Oasis, probably the largest immersive museum in North America, which is running on 40 Vertex systems, as far as I recall, doing projection mapping with over 120 projectors. And I think currently of over 40 terabytes of content. A lot of the content management functions were born in Oasis. So yeah, for all our Canadian friends, if you're at Exposcene, look forward to seeing you there. And if you're interested in visiting the Oasis with us, just drop us an email, sales@iversal, or Martin or Jan at iversal. And yeah, we look forward to hearing from you. In that case, have a great day. Thanks for being here today and see you soon.
See you soon. Bye-bye.